A successful businessman suddenly becomes the sole suspect in a mysterious murder. The victim is his secret lover, and the crime scene is a locked room with no escape routes. What seemed like a simple case is turned upside down by a truth buried for months. Adrián is the CEO of a highly reputable high-tech company. He's not only successful in his career, but also has a very happy family with an elegant and beautiful wife and a lovely, well-behaved daughter. However, this man, who was enjoying success in both his career and family life, has recently become embroiled in a murder case. The victim is Laura, a married female photographer and Adrián's lover. Laura died in a locked hotel room. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation from being struck on the head with a blunt object. When the bodies were discovered, all the doors and windows of the room where the crime occurred were locked from the inside. Inside the room, besides Laura's body, was Adrián with a head injury, along with a decorative item covered in his fingerprints and Laura's blood. After examination, the police confirmed that this decorative item was the murder weapon. Therefore, Adrián was considered the suspect and arrested on the spot. A few days later, his private legal counsel had to pay €1 million to temporarily bail him out of the police station. At the same time, they hired Virginia, a brilliant lawyer who had never failed in her 30 years of practice, to defend Adrián. That night, an elderly woman with white hair and an extremely sharp appearance knocked on Adrián's door. This woman identified herself as Virginia and said she had arrived 3 hours earlier than scheduled. Adrián seemed quite surprised, but Virginia quickly and seriously explained why she had arrived early. It turned out she had just received news that the police had found a crucial witness early that morning. This witness was capable of convicting Adrián, so it was highly likely he would be brought back to the police station tonight for further questioning. Virginia was forced to review the entire sequence of events over the next 3 hours. Only by clarifying even the smallest details would she have a chance of winning Adrián's defense. After speaking, she took out a pocket watch and placed it on the table. The ticking of the second hand seemed to urge Adrián to quickly reveal the truth of the case. After a moment of hesitation, he began to recount what had happened that day. According to him, a mysterious person had discovered his relationship with Laura. This person made an anonymous phone call to extort €100,000 from them. On the agreed date, Adrián and Laura went to room number 5 at the Bella Hotel to hand over the money to the extortionist. However, they waited a long time in the room without the person appearing. As darkness fell, Adrián's phone unexpectedly received a message from Laura's phone. "I'll tell you everything. Meet me in room T-Ishu at the Bella Hotel." It was then that they realized Laura's phone seemed to have disappeared. The blackmailer had somehow stolen it and used it to text Adrián. However, neither Adrián nor Laura understood his true intentions. They both sensed the other was plotting something else. Therefore, they decided to leave the hotel first. Before leaving, Laura, as usual, went to the restroom to relieve herself, while Adrián stood by the door putting on his coat. Just then, someone suddenly appeared from behind and shoved him. Before Adrián could see the person's face, his head slammed against the full-length mirror on the wall, knocking him unconscious. When he woke up, the first thing he discovered was that Laura had died in the bathroom. Beside her body lay €100,000 in cash. While frantically embracing her corpse and calling for help, Adrián was arrested by police who broke down the door, considering him a suspect. Adrián believes the killer likely hid in hidden corners, such as a closet inside the hotel room, before he and Laura arrived. Then, the killer seized the opportunity to knock him unconscious and murder Laura. Regarding the text messages he received on his phone, he asserts that the killer also used Laura's phone to send them. The purpose was to frame him for her death and mislead the police into believing that Laura was unhappy with their relationship and intended to expose their affair. Adrián, wanting to prevent Laura from doing so, murdered her. After recounting the entire incident, Adrián wept, expressing remorse and saying he should never have gotten involved with Laura in the first place. Now, he not only faces charges of murder, but also of indirectly causing her death. His wife, Sonia, after learning the truth, has already taken their daughter and left the house. Their marriage is very likely to fall apart. Despite Adrián's remorse, Virginia remained visibly moved. However, she later pointed out a flaw in his testimony. The police investigation report indicated that, around the time of the crime, a witness heard Laura screaming from room number 715. This witness immediately called the police and then waited outside the room. A few minutes later, the police arrived at the scene and found the door locked from the inside and secured with an anti-theft chain. Although the police called hotel staff for assistance, they were unable to unlock the door from the outside. Ultimately, they had no choice but to forcibly break down the door to gain entry. Inside the room at that time were only Adrián and Laura's body, so there was absolutely no trace of a third person. All the windows were also locked from the inside. Furthermore, due to the cold winter weather, the hotel had turned on the heating system. To prevent guests from opening the windows themselves, the staff had even used a special wrench to lock each window simultaneously. To open these windows, the same special wrench had to be used. In other words, the crime scene was an absolutely sealed room. The killer had absolutely no way to escape after committing the crime. If the mystery of this sealed room could not be solved, then the only person who could have murdered Laura was Adrián, who was in that very room. As she spoke, Virginia pulled a newspaper from her briefcase, which reported the disappearance of a young man. She got straight to the point and told him that she had investigated Laura's murder and found it closely linked to the disappearance. If he wanted to be exonerated, Adrián had to tell her the whole truth. In her view, his undefeated record of 30 years as a lawyer was absolutely unbreakable. If Adrián deliberately concealed even a part of the truth, he would certainly be at a disadvantage during the court proceedings. If that were the case, she'd rather not take on the case at all, to avoid damaging her own reputation. After glancing at the newspaper article about the disappearance, Adrián's expression immediately changed. After a moment of thought, he finally decided to reveal the whole story to her. It all started 3 months ago, when Adrián lied to his wife, saying he would be going on a business trip abroad for a few days. But in reality, Adrián and his mistress, Lauza, had gone to a secluded, less visited resort villa for a romantic getaway. Lauza, being a photographer, also took advantage of the trip to take photos for documentation. After spending a few days together, on the drive back to the city, feeling guilty towards his wife and children, Adrián suggested breaking up with Lauza. She was sitting in the passenger seat at the time. Unexpectedly, Lauza refused to end the relationship. Just as they were arguing, a wild deer suddenly darted into the middle of the road. Adrián swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding a collision with an oncoming car. The driver of that car, trying to avoid Adrián's vehicle, ended up crashing into a cliffside, causing a serious traffic accident. When Adrián and Lauza got out of the car to check the situation, they discovered the young man driving the other car had died. Furthermore, there were no other passengers inside the car. Adrián panicked and pulled out his phone to call the police, but Lauza stopped him. She argued that if they called, their affair would surely be exposed. At that point, not only would their families be shattered, but their careers would also be negatively impacted. Moreover, she astutely noticed that before the accident, the other driver wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was texting while driving. Therefore, Adrián wasn't entirely responsible for the accident. Lauza's words left Adrián in a state of indecision. In addition, the road where the incident occurred was deserted, with no one around and no surveillance cameras. Ultimately, Adrián was persuaded by Lauza and decided to flee the scene. However, his off-road vehicle was damaged during the dangerous encounter. At this point, he couldn't start the car anymore. Just as they were both at a loss as to what to do, the sound of a car engine echoed from not far away. Clearly, a vehicle was about to pass. To avoid attracting attention, Laura, in her desperation, came up with an idea. She reclined her seat, lowered the car driver's body to the back, and then pretended to be the owner of the car. Next, she stood next to Adrián's SUV, acting as if she were negotiating compensation for the collision. Soon, the passing car pulled up beside them. Emmer, the driver, was a kind, middle-aged man. He stopped and asked if Adrián and Laura needed any help. Laura cleverly declined his offer, claiming no one was injured. Just then, the phone inside the car suddenly rang. Laura, trying to remain calm, hurried to the car and found the deceased driver's phone. She silenced it and pretended to be on a call. But before one problem was solved, another arose. Laura immediately noticed a pool of blood dripping from beneath the car. Fortunately, passers-by didn't get out to check. Laura stood beside the car, maintaining a calm expression and deliberately blocking the view of any potential threats. A short while later, the middle-aged driver drove away from the scene. After he left, she slipped the driver's phone into her pocket. At the same time, she shifted her attention to instructing Adrián to quickly clean up the scene. Then, they would find a place to dispose of the body, because if no one discovered it beforehand, they still had a chance to leave the scene and make everyone believe that the driver had caused the accident himself by texting while driving. But now, both of them have been spotted by a middle-aged driver passing by. Escaping the scene was absolutely impossible. Their only option was to find a way to dispose of the body and the vehicle involved in the accident. Adrián was completely panicked and lost his composure, so he simply followed Laura's instructions. They then cleaned up the remaining blood at the scene and carried the victim's body into the trunk of the car. Next, Adrián was responsible for driving the car to find a secluded spot in the vicinity to dispose of the body. Laura remained in Adrián's off-road vehicle to wait for the rescue team to arrive. It wasn't until dusk that Adrián found a deserted lake deep in the forest. Just as he was about to push the car and the body into the lake, a strange noise suddenly echoed through the silent forest. Adrián was startled. It took him a moment to regain his composure before he noticed a wild deer standing nearby, watching. Without hesitation, desperation, Adrián quickly pushed the car into the lake. Soon after, Laura arrived in her repaired car to pick him up. As soon as they got in, Adrián noticed her panicked expression. After some questioning, Laura recounted what had happened while she waited for the rescue team. It turned out that after Adrián left to dispose of the body, Laura had called for roadside assistance. However, due to a shortage of personnel, the local rescue team couldn't quickly arrive at the scene of the accident. In this desperate situation, she had no choice but to sit in the car and anxiously wait. Just then, a middle-aged man wearing glasses drove past and asked if she needed help. Laura immediately lied, saying that while avoiding a wild deer crossing the road, her car had broken down and wouldn't start. Coincidentally, the man with glasses was the owner of a car repair shop. After a preliminary inspection of the off-road vehicle, he confirmed that the incident was not serious. However, since he didn't have any tools with him, after getting her permission, the man with glasses decided to tow the off-road vehicle back to his shop to help with repairs. Laura drove along to his house. On the way, this very talkative man with glasses constantly struck up conversations and shared stories with her. He introduced himself as Tomas, with a wife and son who worked at a bank. Their family of 3 lived a simple and happy life. Not wanting to reveal personal information to Tomas, Laura lied, saying she ran a bookstore. Unexpectedly, as soon as she mentioned the bookstore, his interest in the conversation grew even more enthusiastic. A look of pride even appeared on his face. It turned out his wife was Elvira, an avid reader, especially fond of classical literature and theater. When she was younger, she had been a stage actress. Faced with a talkative man like Tomas, Laura only occasionally responded with a few polite pleasantries. Fortunately, his house wasn't far, so they arrived soon after. As soon as they got home, Tomas immediately set about fixing her car, while Elvira enthusiastically invited Laura inside to rest. Like her husband, she was a very talkative person. Seeing Laura's wedding ring, Elvira unconsciously shifted the topic to marriage and children. She even showed Laura a picture of her son, Daniel. After seeing the picture, Laura was terrified because the young man in the photo was the driver who had died in the car accident that day. Laura was so worried that she couldn't sit still. Seeing that Tomas had finished fixing the car, she immediately stood up to leave. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Elvira noticed that Daniel, who worked at the bank, hadn't returned home yet, so she kept muttering that she needed to call her son. Hearing this, Laura suddenly remembered that Daniel's phone was still in her jacket pocket. While Tomas and Elvira weren't looking, she secretly slipped the phone under the sofa cushion in the living room. Elvira couldn't reach him, but she quickly found Daniel's phone under the cushion thanks to the ringing sound. Laura seized the opportunity, pretending to remind them that Daniel had probably accidentally left his phone at home before going to work. Although she reluctantly fooled them, Laura had a feeling that they were beginning to suspect her. So, after saying goodbye, she immediately prepared to drive away. In her panic, she made a huge mistake. Right in front of Tomas, she adjusted the driver's seat in the off-road vehicle. This detail was enough to prove that someone else had been driving the off-road vehicle. Tomas seemed to have noticed this as well, but he didn't say anything more. After hearing Laura's entire account, Adrián felt like he was in a thick fog, but since things had come to this point, they had no choice but to accept it. Following Laura's instructions, Adrián went to a used car market to dispose of his off-road vehicle. He then reported the theft of the classic car. Because he had lied to his wife about going on a business trip abroad while dating Laura, to make the lie convincing, he even used his connections to forge round-trip airline tickets and hotel receipts. Furthermore, after the incident, Adrián and Laura officially broke up. They vowed never to see each other again to avoid exposure. However, what was bound to happen eventually did. The peaceful days didn't last long before Adrián was summoned to the police station for questioning. It turned out that upon discovering their son was missing, Tomas and Elvira immediately reported the incident to the police. Furthermore, they suspected that Daniel's disappearance was connected to Laura. They found traces of another car collision near the cliffside, close to where Laura had the accident. Moreover, Daniel's phone activity history showed that before Tomas took Laura home, the phone had been used for texting. If that were true, how could Daniel have left his phone at home before going to work? The only logical explanation was that Laura had previously interacted with Daniel and inadvertently taken his phone home with her. Additionally, when Laura drove away from Tomas's house, she unconsciously adjusted the driver's seat. This was enough to prove that someone else had been driving the off-road vehicle. Furthermore, this person must have been a taller and stronger man than Laura. Based on all those clues, Tomas had almost figured out the truth about his son's disappearance. However, when Laura repaired the car, she didn't leave her real personal information. Tomas only managed to record the license plate of the off-road vehicle. It was thanks to this license plate that the police found the owner of the car, Adrián. Faced with police questioning, he insisted that he didn't know Laura at all. He claimed the off-road vehicle had been stolen stolen before the incident. Adrián had also prepared fake business trip tickets and hotel receipts to create an alibi. In addition, he had previously reported his car stolen, so the police easily believed his statement. Adrián thought the matter was closed. Unexpectedly, a few days later, he saw a new news report about Daniel's disappearance on television. News reports indicated that Daniel, a bank employee, had previously abused his position to embezzle a huge sum of public funds. Therefore, the police began to suspect that Daniel hadn't disappeared but had absconded with the money. Adrián immediately realized this might be connected to Laura. He had recently learned that Laura's husband not only worked at the same bank as Daniel, but was also one of its managers. Adrián believed Laura had likely asked her husband to fabricate evidence of Daniel's embezzlement. She wanted to use this to mislead the police investigation and erase any connection between herself and Daniel's disappearance. To prevent Laura from continuing her actions and to avoid ruining everything, Adrián secretly arranged a meeting with her. Laura had cut off her long hair, giving her a much sharper appearance. Laura frankly confessed to everything she had done. However, the evidence of Daniel's embezzlement wasn't fabricated by Laura, but rather, she created it herself. From the moment Adrián carried Daniel's body away, Laura seized the opportunity to take his wallet. This allowed her to obtain Daniel's bank account number. Then, using her husband's work computer and access to his banking system, Laura transferred a huge sum of public funds into Daniel's personal account. Her goal was to stage a fake crime scene, making everyone believe that Daniel had embezzled public funds and fled. In this way, she and Adrián would completely sever all ties to Daniel's disappearance. Adrián completely disagreed with Laura's risky actions and was horrified by what she had done. A heated argument quickly ensued, leading to a tense and unhappy separation. For over a month afterward, Adrián's life gradually returned to its usual peaceful state. He consistently achieved outstanding results in his work and was also awarded the title of Outstanding Entrepreneur. At a celebratory party hosted by the state for Adrián, Thomas unexpectedly appeared disguised as a journalist. It turned out that both Thomas and Elvira had never believed their son would embezzle public funds and flee. For some time now, Thomas had been secretly investigating Adrián and Laura. He had almost certainly suspected that Adrián and Laura were responsible for the car accident that killed Daniel and even disposed of his body afterward. However, Thomas hadn't yet found any evidence strong enough to incriminate them. This time, his disguise as a journalist to approach Adrián was solely in the hope of getting him to reveal the location of Daniel's body so that he and his wife could give their son a proper burial. Thomas promised Adrián that if he revealed the location, he would drop his investigation and not testify against Adrián and Laura to the police. As a family man, after hearing Thomas's heart-wrenching pleas, Adrián's conscience became even more tormented. Just as he was torn between revealing the truth, security at the party discovered Thomas's imposter and immediately escorted him out. For over a month afterward, Adrián didn't see Thomas again. However, a few days ago, he unexpectedly received an anonymous blackmail letter. Inside the letter was a photograph of a deserted lake in the forest where Adrián had disposed of the body, along with a digitally altered audio recording. The blackmailer in the recording claimed to know the full details of Adrián and Laura's crimes and demanded 100,000 euros. With no other choice, Adrián and Laura complied. They brought the cash to room number 715 at the Bella Hotel, and from there, everything led to tragedy when Laura was murdered in a locked room, and Adrián was arrested as a suspect in the murder. After some thought, Adrián concluded that the murderer of Laura was likely the middle-aged driver he and Laura had encountered after the traffic accident. This man may have noticed the bloodstains under the car and become suspicious of Adrián and Laura. Therefore, he pretended to leave but secretly returned, silently observing their every move, ultimately witnessing Adrián's disposal of Daniel's body. The strange sounds Adrián heard before pushing both Daniel's body and the car into the lake were probably not caused by wild deer, but rather unintentional noises from the middle-aged driver while following him. Adrián suspected this man because the blackmail letter contained a photograph of the deserted lake in the forest where he had dumped the body. Adrián felt that besides the middle-aged driver, no one else could have known the location where he disposed of his body. After Adrián recounted the entire story of Daniel's disappearance, Virginia once again maintained her cold expression and pointed out two inexplicable issues in his testimony. First, if the middle-aged driver was indeed the killer, his primary motive was clearly extortion. If so, why would he kill Laura? Moreover, he didn't take the cash with him after committing the crime. Second, there was the issue of the inexplicable locked room. After the murder, how did the killer manage to escape from such a locked room? Adrián was so overwhelmed that he was speechless. However, he quickly threw the same question back at Virginia. In any case, Adrián had spent a huge sum of money to invite her here fear, not to be constantly questioned, but to ask for her help in solving the problem. Virginia truly lived up to her reputation as a legendary lawyer who had never tasted defeat in the past 30 years. After reviewing Adrián's entire testimony once again, she immediately concocted a highly plausible story on the spot. According to Virginia's story, before Adrián and Laura brought the cash to room T-6 of the Bella Hotel, they followed the blackmailer's instructions and threw Laura's phone into a designated trash can by the roadside. After retrieving the phone, the blackmailer arrived at room 715 first and hid inside the wardrobe. Waiting until Adrián and Laura were waiting in the room until late at night, he secretly used Laura's phone to send Adrián a text message. This led everyone to believe that Laura was the one who had arranged for Adrián to come to the hotel. After reading the message, both immediately prepared to leave the hotel. At that moment, the blackmailer took advantage of the situation, knocked Adrián unconscious, and used a decorative object in the room to kill Laura. He then imprinted Adrián's fingerprints on the murder weapon. In reality, there were two people with a motive to kill Laura and frame Adrián: Tomás and Elvira, who were grieving the loss of their beloved son. They devised this plan to avenge their deceased child. The person directly carrying out the plan was clearly Tomás. According to that explanation, the entire story would become much more logical. However, regarding Virginia's hypothesis, Adrián immediately raised the same question. After Tomás killed Laura and fabricated the crime scene, how did he escape from that locked room? Virginia seemed to have prepared for this beforehand. She once again took another newspaper from her briefcase. It reported the murder of Lauza and the arrest of Adrián at the scene. Accompanying the article was a photograph taken at the scene, clearly showing Elvis's figure. It turned out that Elvisa was an employee at the Bella Hotel where the murder took place. She had helped Tomás create a perfectly concealed room. On the day of the crime, with Elvis's assistance, Tomás had secretly hidden in hotel room number 715. They lured Adrián and Lauza there because right next to this room was an ordinary storage room, rarely visited by anyone. After committing the crime, Tomás used a specialized wrench provided by Elvisa to open a locked window and then climbed out of the hotel room. Under the cover of darkness, he crept along the outer ledge and jumped into the adjacent storage room. When the police arrived, they called hotel staff to try and unlock the door to room number 715, which was locked from the inside. Elvisa pretended to cooperate with the police and also rushed to the scene. When the police were unable to open the door and were forced to break it down, Elvisa followed them inside. The moment the police discovered the body and the scene descended into brief chaos, Elvisa seized the opportunity, using the wrench he carried to securely lock the window that Tomás had opened earlier, thus creating a nearly perfect airtight seal. As for the photograph of the wild lake in the forest sent to Adrián, it was just a photo taken by Tomás, not because he actually knew the location where Adrián disposed of the body. It was already dark when Adrián disposed of the body. In addition, it was a completely unfamiliar environment, so he was not at all familiar with the scenery around that deserted lake. Therefore, he mistakenly believed that the photo Tomás sent was the location where he disposed of his body. Virginia was interrupted by a sudden phone call. The caller revealed that the police had found a crucial witness, the middle-aged driver who had passed by the scene of the accident that day. Upon hearing this news, Adrián felt disheartened and despondent. Given the current situation, even if he could clear himself of suspicion regarding Laura's murder, he couldn't escape the charges related to fleeing the scene of the accident, disposing of the body, and erasing evidence of the crime. However, Virginia still held the upper hand. She immediately constructed an even more perfect defense for Adrián than before. According to this new testimony, Adrián and Laura had no romantic relationship but were merely friends. 3 months prior, Laura had borrowed Adrián's off-road vehicle to go on a solo camping trip and collect photographic material. On her way back, she accidentally caused an accident that killed Daniel. Everything that happened afterward was Laura's doing alone and completely unrelated to Adrián. After all, he had prepared his domestic and international business trip tickets and hotel receipts for the period of the incident, giving him a solid alibi. This way, Adrián could remain completely innocent. Laura, being dead, could not testify or refute his testimony. Regarding why Adrián was at the scene of Laura's murder, Virginia offered a plausible explanation. According to her, after Laura received the audio recording and photos used for blackmail, she begged Adrián to accompany her to the hotel to meet with the blackmailer. As a result, Tomás mistook Adrián for Laura's accomplice and knocked him unconscious on the spot. In this way, Adrián went from being involved in the case to an innocent victim caught up in the whole affair. At most, Adrián would only face a relatively minor charge of cover-up. Of course, if direct evidence could be found proving that Laura herself disposed of the victim's body, this defense would become even more convincing. For example, he could place Laura's personal items, such as a ring ring or bracelet at the disposal site or inside Daniel's car, leading people to believe she accidentally dropped them while handling the body. If he could do that, the judge would have grounds to believe the entire argument of the defense lawyer, and Adrián would have a perfect chance of escaping conviction. Virginia even took out a map and a pen, asking Adrián to mark the exact location where the body was disposed of. However, after hearing her defense plan, he considered this method completely impractical. The reason is simple. Although Laura is dead and there's no one left to testify, the male driver who passed by the scene on the day of the accident saw them together. With this witness, Virginia's fabricated testimony would be easily exposed. In fact, Adrián had long been aware that this driver was his biggest obstacle to acquittal. Therefore, he had previously commissioned his legal counsel to find this man, hoping to bribe him before the police arrived. Unexpectedly, the police got there first. However, after Adrián's questioning, Virginia remained completely calm. She stated that everything she had said earlier was false. The police had not found the so-called crucial witness. They didn't even know of the driver's existence. Virginia only made up the story to force Adrián to tell the truth quickly. After some conversation, she realized that he was a very cautious person and would absolutely not easily reveal what he knew. Therefore, she decided to use a little trick to force him to speak up. Unexpectedly, after listening to Virginia's explanation, Adrián seemed unconcerned. He said that he had actually known all along that Tomás was the murderer of Laura, because before being knocked unconscious, he had clearly seen Tomás's face in the mirror. Moreover, when he was arrested, he also recognized Elvira, who worked at the hotel. Based on these things, he guessed that Tomás and Elvira had set this deadly trap for him and Laura. The reason he hadn't told the truth before was, firstly, because he couldn't confirm whether Virginia was trustworthy. Secondly, because he still couldn't figure out what method Tomás used to create such a perfectly sealed room. Therefore, he deliberately only revealed part of the truth and at the same time used this opportunity to test Virginia's abilities to see if she could deduce the whole truth of the case from the small clues. Now it seemed Virginia's reputation was indeed well deserved. By this point, Adrián was completely convinced. He still believed she could definitely help him escape punishment. After flattering Virginia, he marked the location where he disposed of the body on the map. At the same time, he revealed a shocking truth. It turned out that on the day of the incident, as Adrián was preparing to push the car into the lake, there were sudden thumping noises coming from inside the trunk. That's when he realized that Daniel, in the accident that day, was actually only injured and unconscious, not dead. However, Adrián was extremely panicked at the time. He feared that his intention to dispose of the body to erase the evidence would be discovered, so he went ahead and did it. In the end, he still pushed both Daniel and the car to the bottom of the lake. When the forensic team found the body, they would surely be able to determine Daniel's true cause of death. Therefore, Adrián reminded Virginia that before the trial began, she needed to prepare a strategy to deal with this issue. Unexpectedly, after hearing these words, Virginia suddenly lost control of her emotions and became enraged. She had always believed Daniel's death was an accidental death. She never imagined it was a murder. Although she was Adrián's defense lawyer, Virginia felt immense outrage at his cruel actions. However, she could only continue her defense. She questioned Adrián again, asking if he was hiding any other truths. Adrián swore he had confessed everything, but Virginia no longer believed a word he said. Immediately afterward, in front of Adrián, she presented her final conclusion. In fact, Adrián had been lying from beginning to end. Laura was simply an innocent victim caught in the crossfire. After the car accident, Laura wanted to call the police, but Adrián resolutely prevented her. The person who suggested fleeing the scene and disposing of the body to erase evidence was obviously Adrián. The person who took Daniel's wallet and then fabricated evidence to create the false impression that he had fled with the money was also Adrián. Virginia was able to reach this conclusion because she had previously reviewed Laura's medical report. After the accident, she suffered from severe anxiety, along with insomnia and hair loss. This was also the real reason she cut off her long hair. If Laura truly intended to flee after the accident and destroy the body, as Adrián described, she wouldn't have been in such a state of anxiety, self-reproach, and guilt. To find release, Laura proactively confessed everything to Tomás and Elvira. She also planned to meet Adrián in room Chibai of the Bella Hotel. The messages that Adrián's phone received were actually set by Laura herself to be sent automatically at a predetermined time. Lauza's true intention was to prevent Adrián from being left out of the picture. She hoped to force him to reveal the location where he disposed of Daniel's body so that Tomás and Elvira could find their son. As for the blackmail, it was also a way for Lauza to extort compensation from Tomás and Elvira. But what Lauza didn't know was that Daniel wasn't dead when Adrián disposed the body. If he revealed the hiding place, the police would certainly determine the real cause of Daniel's death. Adrián would undoubtedly face murder charges. Seeing that Lauza Lauza wouldn't let him go and insisted on revealing the location, Adrián began to fear exposure. In a fit of rage, he killed Lauza. After committing the crime, Adrián tried to flee. But at that moment, witnesses who had heard Lauza's screams were waiting outside the hotel room, anticipating the arrival of the police. With no way out, Adrián hastily devised a flawed plan to frame his son. He hoped that later, using his financial resources and network of connections, he could fill in the gaps and escape punishment. This was the whole truth about the two murders. However, Adrián disagreed with Virginia's reasoning. He questioned her, asking why, if Lauza had told Tomás and Elvisa the truth, they hadn't reported it directly to the police. Virginia explained that only Adrián knew the location where the bodies were disposed of. Lauza was dead, and Adrián had bribed the middle-aged driver who had driven through that area. Therefore, no one could prove that Adrián had been at the crime scene. Although they desperately wanted justice for their son, Tomás and Elvisa were completely powerless. As she spoke, Virginia led Adrián to the window and told him to look closely at the room across the street. Adrián then noticed Tomás standing across the street, silently observing his house. Tomás wasn't just watching Adrián. After learning that Virginia was about to defend him, he was secretly monitoring her as well. It was this discovery of Tomás's surveillance that allowed Virginia to piece together all the clues and deduce the truth. However, Adrián still wanted to deny it. He insisted that Tomás and Elvira had orchestrated the locked room plot to frame him. According to Adrián, the photograph of Elvira's reflection in the mirror, which Virginia had brought, was the clearest evidence. Unexpectedly, after hearing this, Virginia mocked him for overlooking a crucial detail. Elvira's reflection in the mirror was completely absent from the photograph. Earlier, Virginia had verified that on the very day Laura was murdered, Elvira happened to be on leave and was not at the hotel. This suggested that Elvira's image in the newspaper photo had been digitally altered and superimposed. It was highly likely that this was a trap deliberately set by Tomás and Elvira. If in court, Adrián were to actually claim that they had framed him, he would undoubtedly reveal a major flaw, making his defense extremely difficult. Seeing Adrián becoming discouraged and losing his will to defend himself, Virginia seized the opportunity, reminding him that only by telling the whole truth could she construct a complete, coherent testimony without any loopholes. At this point, Adrián was completely convinced by Virginia's reasoning abilities and composure. Finally, he admitted that he was the one who had killed Laura. The entire sequence of events in both cases was consistent with Virginia's final conclusions. Immediately after confessing, Adrián received a call from his legal counsel. Virginia told him to take the call first, while she wanted to go outside for some fresh air and relaxation. Incidentally, she also helped Adrián prepare his testimony for the upcoming trial. After Virginia left, the legal advisor called Adrián with some incredibly good news. After verifying information from various sources, he had found the middle-aged driver who had passed by the accident scene that day and successfully bribed him. Adrián was thrilled to hear this. However, at that very moment, he suddenly felt interference with his cell phone signal, as if a strange signal was very close. The interference seemed to be coming from him. Adrián quickly bent down to check and discovered that the fountain pen tucked in his shirt pocket was leaking ink. This was the pen Virginia had given him to mark the location for disposing of the body. With curiosity mixed with suspicion, Adrián unscrewed the pen to examine it and was horrified to find a small listening device hidden inside. Realizing something was wrong, he frantically looked up towards the opposite room. Virginia, who had just left not long ago, was now standing next to Tomás on the other side. It was then that Adrián realized with shock that the woman was not the real Virginia, but Elvira in disguise. Elvira loved theater and had been a stage actress in her youth. Everything she and her husband had done from beginning to end was aimed at making Adrián confess the truth about the two murders and reveal the location where Daniel's body was disposed of. Upon learning the truth, Adrián was instantly stunned. At this point, even the real lawyer, Virginia, no matter how talented, could no longer help him win the case. What awaited Adrián was only long years in prison. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next videos.